Wiregrass Foundation's partnership with PARCA goes back about 10 years as we began investing in Dothan City schools and wanted to use data to chart progress, improve programs, and develop replicable models to improve academic achievement. PARCA's role became even more critical when we joined with DCS to implement BrightKey, a stakeholder-driven model of student intervention introduced into 2 elementary schools, one Title I and one non-Title I, to create effective solutions for all children. Thanks to Dr. Joe Adams and his team at PARCA, we were able to demonstrate statistically significant relationships between the BrightKey program and the rate of academic growth in both reading and math in elementary grades across demographic cohorts. PARCA's work showed us where the program was working well and where we could make improvements, and we used their analysis formatively to continue strengthening the program. While COVID interrupted both statewide testing and BrightKey program delivery, our program is reinvented for 2021, and we anticipate our PARCA partnership will continue to allow us to demonstrate the value of this program for all children grades K through 6.
Good morning, and welcome back to Day 3 of the 2021 Annual Forum, Alabama Online, Failure to Connect. I'm Ryan Hankins, Executive Director of PARCA. On behalf of our board, staff, investors, and supporters, thank you for being with us. I want to thank the many sponsors whose support have made this event free to everyone. You'll see their logos on various places throughout our website and the Whova app. And today, I want to particularly recognize and thank Shipped, Spire, Tech Birmingham, and Vulcan Materials Company. Thank you all. As we enter Day 3 of our conversation, I thought it would be good to pause and reflect for a moment on what we have learned thus far. We have learned that 23% of Alabamians don't have internet subscription. Now, they may have access, but they're not online. Of those Alabama households who do have an internet subscription, only 57% have what is considered to be high-speed internet of any speed, which ranks us at 47th in the country. We've learned that high-speed internet is considered 25 megabits per second, and that's the minimum speed for a location to be considered served. 25 megabits per second is thought to be adequate for basic web browsing, for email, for downloading high definition movies, and basic uses like that for 1 to 2 people. But a larger household, a larger customer, more demanding uses require greater speeds. And over the last year, our homes have become offices and schools and theaters. And the concept of good enough in 2019 might not be good enough service in 2021. We've learned that assessing and measuring who really has access is tricky. Measuring access by census tract may work in urban areas, but not in rural or less densely populated areas of our state. Maureen Neighbors from Macke shared about Alabama's efforts to do best-in-nation mapping of broadband access, a project underway right now and hopefully to be completed by the end of this year. We'll hear more about the challenges of mapping and access on Friday. We're reminded that there are many kinds of providers providing various solutions to different problems. Not every service, not every provider can meet every need. Fred Johnson from FTC, it's Farmers Telecom in Rainsville, reminds us that our for-profit providers are challenged to serve less densely populated areas of the state and where demand, for whatever reason, is lower. Public-private partnerships, suggested Jordan Crenshaw from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are the best way to address this market failure and to achieve the economic and educational benefits of digital inclusion. Digital inclusion and digital equity, as discussed by Angela Seifert from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance and Abe Harper of Harper Technologies in Mobile, should be the guiding principles and top priorities of these conversations. For us to truly advance, people need access, but they also need to be able to pay for the access. They need the equipment, the training, and the reason to be online. In these last 3 days, we have much to explore. How much capacity is there really? We have many providers, but only so many wires coming into our homes and businesses. What is broadband redundancy, and is it even possible? What do we prioritize? Increasing speed, increasing access, or increasing adoption? Can for-profits, nonprofits, and governments form partnerships that work? What is the right combination of direct public investment and public subsidy, and where should it go? To subsidize infrastructure, subsidize providers, subsidize individual subscribers? And how do we enable people to connect for the very first time and to get the full benefit of that connection? Today, we're exploring local efforts to address these and other questions. Our host for the morning is PARCA board member Brian Hamilton, CEO of Trillion Communications in Birmingham. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm proud to be a PARCA board member and investor. I'm equally proud of the research and appreciate PARCA's attention to looking and focusing on how governments can collaborate to improve services, reduce disparities, and promote economic growth and resiliency for our economy. This morning, we'll look at communities partnering with utilities, telcos, and other service providers, and how they seek to meet local needs. These local projects may prove to be models to emulate, warning signs in some cases, or evidence of the need for more coordinated response. We have a distinguished panel this morning, and I'm pleased to introduce them now. First, Stacy Cantrell, Vice President, Engineering of Huntsville Utilities. Good morning, Stacy.
Good morning. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Next, we have Derek Lee, Director of Opelika Power Services.
Morning, Brian. Glad to be here.
Next, we have fellow PARCA board member, President and CEO of Bank Independent, Mr. Macke Mauldin. Morning, Macke.
Good morning. Thank you.
And Vice President, Public Affairs of the Alabama Rural Electric Association of Cooperatives, Sean Strickler, will join us as well. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Brian. Thank you for having me on.
Last but certainly not least, the moderator of this morning's discussion, Mr. Chris Mitchell, Director of Community Broadband Networks, Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Good morning, Chris, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. I pulled out the big mic, so it would be obvious that I have a lot of credibility. I'm going to throw some slides up here. I'm going to do a short presentation to start, and then we will move into introducing our panelists a little bit more fully, and then we will get into the Q&A. So with that, let me do this. And I wanted to say that I really appreciate being here. It's an honor. I love organizations like this. I think they are tremendous. For 2 days, you've been focused on these broadband issues. This is what I do every day, all week, and sometimes into the weekends. And as you can tell, it's really fun, right? So I want to also thank Ryan and Adam, the whole team at PARCA, for putting this together. It's incredibly stressful to make something like this work, and I'm really excited at how it's going. And I also wanted to speak plainly at the outset that some of the solutions that I discussed, that my work covers in terms of cities being more involved with this, is sometimes interpreted as being disrespectful of the big carriers, big companies. And I don't want any of my comments here to be interpreted negatively. I think this is a day in which we're going to celebrate the investment in Alabama, and I certainly think that all kinds of companies and entities are making very positive contributions. So I want to follow the tone that Fred Johnson set yesterday, and in talking about this a little bit. My organization has been around a little longer than I have, and I've been running the broadband work for almost 15 years. We focus on local solutions to problems within our broadband work, and then more generally, we're focused on really supporting Main Street economies, local businesses wherever possible, to have really strong, healthy economies. I wanted to pick up, like I said, with what Fred Johnson had said, and in this note of unity, in that I truly believe that in order to bring internet access to everyone, truly high quality internet access, we should learn from electricity, not because they're the same. There's significant differences, but because to get electricity out to everyone, it took tremendous amounts of private investment, lots of private companies, big private companies, small private companies. It took many hundreds of cooperatives, almost 1,000 electric cooperatives. It took 4,000 municipalities at the height, now about 2,000 that still operate their own grids, and we did it. And our economy was stronger because of it. This technology is essential. It's incredibly important. And I'd also harken back to World War II, which is sometimes incorrectly remembered as Ford saving everyone. In reality, just about every American pitched in. And that's where we are with internet access as well. We all need to work together on this. And we may butt heads a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to be talking about all the great things that are happening, but I wanted to acknowledge that this is a long, hard road. There are some people who may not be getting high quality internet access for a few years still at their home. And it might be hard to hear how optimistic I am, but I would just say that 5 years ago, when I was working in this space, I saw so much less hope among the small companies, and even the big companies, as to how we could see investments solving this problem. It wasn't clear how we would get high quality access to everyone, but I see a just total different reaction today as I talk to people who are making these investments, as I talk with government officials who are trying to structure subsidy programs, because we can see it happening. And we have a lot of years to go. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on the horizon, and it's going to take longer for some folks to get there than others, but we're on that road. And make no mistake, we're going to get to a place where everyone has high quality access. I wanted to throw out a resource, even though it's a little bit of a distraction from my presentation. But this is so good. The Michigan Moonshot is an effort by an organization in Michigan that has compiled tons of resources that are really valuable for communities trying to figure out what they can do. A lot of public-private partnership ideas, how to organize locally to create real opportunities. So I wanted to throw it out there. Just do an internet search for the Michigan Moonshot and check out what you find. Now, talking about Alabama, one of the reasons that I'm so enthusiastic is because I've actually been friends with Joanne Hovis for a long time, who runs CTC, which is a company that's been assisting the state of Alabama with this really bold and interesting $100 million investment in these broadband vouchers. Unprecedented. And not only was it an unprecedented idea, it's been implemented in a really interesting way that I think is a real credit to all of the ISPs in Alabama and the people working for the state that have implemented this program. I've read a lot about programs that are supposed to be flexible. This seems like one that has achieved it. And I wanted to note that Joanne has privately told me that she's just blown away at the care that folks took, whether from the internet service providers or from the state, the elected officials, the staff who have the long-term government staff who have implemented this. Big ISPs, they didn't have to contribute to this in the way that they did, in ways that may have been painful. But we saw everyone pitching in, and it's been a real success story that needs to be celebrated. Those 200,000 plus students that have been connected. And it's a real credit to this theme of everyone working together. And so I just wanted to note that, for people who don't have that level of insight into it, this has been just a really remarkable program. A lot was asked of the ISPs, and they really were flexible and worked together in ways to make it happen. And that's exciting. I wanted to note a few things that are happening in Alabama. I certainly don't have an exhaustive list, and I'm sure that some of the things that are happening that I'm not aware about might even be more impressive than this. But we have electric cooperatives that have been making these investments in several places. This is 3 of the ones that I've been aware of, 2 that have been operating for a while, that we're going to talk a little bit more about. Sean will mention this. We're going to talk a little bit about what Huntsville and Opelika have done. Huntsville, its public-private partnership with Google has received national, even international attention. Opelika had built its own network and then chose to sell that for reasons that we'll explore. And that has formed the basis of Point Broadband to make significant investments across Eastern Alabama, including urban and quite rural investments because of the investments that Opelika had made. We see a partnership between Alabama Power and C Spire, and potentially other ISPs as well, that will not just bring really important investments across Alabama, but provide diversified route coverage. I would imagine having major electric utilities involved in this is tremendously beneficial in ways that are probably in the weeds for today's discussion, but it's a really remarkable partnership that is going to yield tremendous benefits. We heard yesterday from Fred Johnson talking about the Farmers Telecommunications Cooperative, which is one of many independents that are making great investments in Alabama to improve access. And then something that maybe few people have heard about was that the first so-called internet exchange, where different providers would come together and exchange traffic, the magic that makes the internet work. The first one to be built in Alabama was a really interesting partnership between the Maxwell Air Force Base, the Wide Open West internet service provider, and Montgomery. And that probably had other partners as well that I'm forgetting, but was very creative. And so we see a lot of good things happening in Alabama to move this forward. Now I have a good news and bad news kind of thing here, which is that the good news is we don't have a broadband problem. I think it's misleading to think of it that way. We should really think about it and chunk it down into more reasonable sizes that are interrelated problems, but they're not just one problem. And that is rural basic access. I'm going to talk about this in the next slide briefly, but getting rural areas basic internet access is the start of it. But as long as you can get, as long as your basic package on Charter, for instance, might be 200 megabits per second, which is much faster than that 25 megabit basic that Ryan spoke about earlier. And in rural areas, if you can't get that, that's going to be a conflict. And so solving some of the problems in rural areas may not actually solve all of the rural problems. And they're going to want comparable access at comparable prices, which is a goal we set out for ourselves in our communications networks in 1934, 33. I should know this, but I've forgotten it. Another problem that we have is within urban areas, the digital divide, where lots of people have access to services from internet service providers, but it may not be within their reach economically, or they may not see the relevance and may need some form of literacy training or a device. Within that, we can even separate between single-family homes and larger apartment buildings, where different types of investments would be necessary to solve that problem. Then we have business services. That's a whole different problem than residential in many ways, to make sure that all businesses have the access they need. Once we have everyone having good access, they often will want competitive dynamics in a marketplace. And then there's issues of reliability, which will also be issues. Now, when I say about the rural issue, like I don't think of it as a rural broadband problem. If you look at North Dakota and South Dakota on this map, which you don't have to read the key or anything, all those splotches of color are where we have rural fiber optics from cooperatives. The orange is telephone, and the purple is the electric cooperatives. Green is where we see municipal networks popping up. They tend to be less geographic area, but some higher density areas. North Dakota has very low density, and yet it has fiber optics across it. We're going to solve this problem. That's what I wanted to point out. We have more rural fiber optics access than most people realize. And there's just tremendous progress that's already been made. We're going to solve this problem. I'm going to do quickly regional context, and I'm wrapping up so we can get to that panel. Mississippi recently put $75 million into rural fiber just from electric cooperatives in a really interesting approach. Mississippi is also at the bottom of the rankings of broadband. We expect over the next 5 years it to rise significantly. Georgia has really innovated interesting ways of improving the maps because the federal maps are so notoriously bad, something that will come up later in the week. We see in Arkansas, another state that is toward the bottom of the list for broadband today, tremendous investments, both from some cities where they are building their own networks. And after a few weeks ago, Arkansas remove barriers to them, we see many more of these networks being announced, including expansions where a city has a network and it is expanding to serve its neighbors, often with gigabit fiber. But they also have tremendous numbers of their electric cooperatives building fiber across very wide areas of the state. And so they will also be surpassing many states in coming years in the rankings where we don't see as much of this investment. And then I wanted to note that Chattanooga really did something amazing over the summer. It has a world-class fiber optic network. Chattanooga and Huntsville are two of the most aggressive, bold cities that we've seen on this. Chattanooga has connected all of the kids in the free and reduced lunch program with internet access for 10 years at no charge to them to make sure that everyone could access the internet. And then the last thing I want to talk about was goals. And I want to put these out there hypothetically. They're worth considering. The last one is really quite bold. But the first would be that Alabama set a goal that everyone has access to whatever the definition of broadband is. We expect the Federal Communications Commission to change the definition of broadband to be a little bit faster than it is right now, in part because of the challenges some people have had on those connections. They have multiple kids trying to do school remotely. So the Alabama setting a bold goal of 100% of people having that by a certain year would be something to consider. Something easier to do, although still challenging, would be that everyone in public housing has high quality access. And I think 18 months would be a bold goal, but it's not outside the realm of the possible if it wanted to prioritize that. And an example I like to give is in Wilson, North Carolina, where a city did this, made sure everyone had high quality access. Susan Crawford wrote a book called Fiber, and she profiled a woman named Tiffany Cooper, who was a low income single family or single mom with 2 kids. And when she had better internet access available to her, she finished a nursing certificate program. Her kids' grades improved. And that's the sort of thing we want to enable people to leave public housing and to be able to have real economic opportunities in their lives. The final thing I'll say is just that I think setting a goal for gigabit in 9 years is really bold. And I think in 9 years, people will look back on that and say, well, yeah, that wasn't as bold as we thought. I think we're heading in that direction, and I'm excited about it. So I think it sounds a little bit crazy today to some people, but the dynamics that I see lining up over this time period, I think that we are going to see those kinds of investments, and we're going to come quite close to it. With that, I'm going to now introduce our speakers, so that our panel, so that we can quickly learn a little bit about them over about 3 minutes per person, and then go into some Q&A. The first person that will be speaking is Macke Mauldin, who is the president and CEO of Bank Independent. Thank you, Macke. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I thank you, Christopher, and I thank PARCA for putting this on. And as a community of Florence, Tuscaloosa, Sheffield, and Muscle Shoals, Culver, Lauderdale counties, I thank you. And I'm just going to kind of give you a very brief update on where we are and what we're doing. We're obviously 2 counties and 4 cities, 150,000 in population. And the former president of the University of North Alabama, Robert Potts, saw the Birmingham PARCA presentation, Together We Can, and he said, we really need to go see that. So PARCA came up, presented it to about 120 people. And that obviously, if you don't know, you need to read about it. It's a great presentation, a great program that PARCA put on. So we came back and said, we need to do that sort of thing in the Shoals area. And we got about 400 people together, and we funded PARCA to do a program in the Shoals called A Greater Shoals, A Pathway. And when they completed that report, they came up with lots of things that we could do better, but we defined it down into 5 or 6 things that need to be done in our community. And of course, broadband was the #1 thing that we need to get accomplished. So we formed a small group of people to study the broadband. We identified what we needed. We talked to people, we talked to elected officials, private citizens, education, healthcare, and we determined that there really is a need for broadband. And we've also visited other communities that have been successful and not quite so successful and going to be real successful. And we determined that we really needed a broadband initiative. And we're much like what you said. We understand it's an expensive proposition. It needs to be a public-private organization that puts this together. And what we really want to do is help the shoals get in the front of the line when the time comes that there is more money available to us. So what we've done is we've hired a firm to help us design a fiber backbone that would go through the shoals area, the 2 counties. They're going to help us establish the investment that we need to come together, identify the funding sources, and we should have that report sometime in May or June. And that kind of sums up where we are. But that's about a 4-year summation. I want to tell you that.
Thank you, Mac.
COVID had a lot to do with it, slowing it down.
I would really like to pull out the note that you said about getting in the front of the line. That is very smart. Where money is going to become available, whether from the state or the federal government, need to be prepared for that. Now we're going to move to Derek Lee, who is the director at Opelika Power Services. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks, Chris. Well, Mac just went through 4 years. I got about 14 years to go through in 3 minutes. So our story really starts in 2004 when Mayor Gary Fuller was elected and tried to get other providers to come into Opelika and offer some competition to improve the service, get greater speeds and some other things. We were unsuccessful in doing that. So in 2008, we began researching, doing our own fiber project. Some had launched in Tennessee. We'd heard about that. So we researched, studied laws. We did a feasibility study in 2009, which says it was feasible for us to do it. So we began working on different things and how to get work around the state law, the Alabama state law. You mentioned Arkansas has changed some of theirs. We had a referendum that passed with 62% of the vote, the citizens of Opelika, in the August of 2010. We received financing in the spring of 2011, began the construction later that year in 2011. We began offering our first services to friendlies in the spring of 2013 and launched it commercially to residential customers in fall of 2013. We invested our total project, which included a new facility for Opelika Power, our smart grid system, and a lot of different things, not just the telecom offering, which offered triple play services, was about $40 million, $42 million. We passed every home in Opelika. Every business, every home in Opelika had access to a 100% fiber optic network. And we are Alabama's first gig city to offer those services. We operated the business for 5 years. Then we had the opportunity we tried to get the laws changed a little bit so we could expand to our neighbors in the county and in other cities where they did not have access. We were unsuccessful getting the laws changed. So then in 2018, in November 2018, we struck a deal with Point Broadband, who purchased our telecom business in 2018. And now we have a partnership with them. They're in our current building. We share facilities with them, and they're now expanding, as you mentioned earlier, to surrounding areas because the law doesn't prohibit them from expanding the network, the fiber network to them. So that's kind of our story real quickly.
Thank you, Derek. Opelika was a trailblazer, built a fiber optic network earlier than most, and has sold that to a private company that is expanding it across Eastern Alabama. So we're going to move now to Stacy Cantrell, the Vice President for Engineering at Huntsville Utilities, and someone that I've enjoyed listening to for many years. So welcome to the panel, Stacy.
Thanks, Chris, and hello again, everybody. So I am with Huntsville Utilities, and many of you are probably aware of Huntsville Utilities. We're an 80-year-old water, gas, and electric utility serving Huntsville, Madison County, parts of Limestone County. So one of the advantages of being a utility is we own a lot of infrastructure already. So we've got a pole system already in place. We began installing fiber optic lines probably back into the 80s, and primarily for many, many years, this was really just something that we did to operate our systems. We installed lines from our main offices out to our water plants, our substations. So any facilities where we wanted to do remote monitoring and even remote control of some features, and we wanted very fast, reliable communications, something other than radio communications or phone lines. And certainly to these places, we want to have redundant systems. So we began installing fiber optic lines back then just for those purposes. It caught the attention of mainly the city and some county agencies. And they would say, well, hey, can you connect this police precinct? Can you connect this fire department? So we started patchworking together a lot of these critical parts of our infrastructure, and at some point realized we had 100 miles of fiber optic system that we just kind of put together, and we wanted to look at that a little more strategically. Probably 10 or so years ago, we were trying to come up with a more strategic build plan. Obviously, this is expensive, so we were trying to look at where do we go first? How do we do this in stages? Around that time, we entered into discussions with Google to lease some of this fiber. And that really opened up a lot of doors to us, because now we weren't quite as constrained by the capital outlay. We were starting to get money coming back in for this, which helped us do this a lot more quickly. So for those of you that aren't aware of that agreement, Huntsville Utilities never wanted to get into being your internet service provider. We don't want to sell you triple play or internet services, but we recognized that we were in a unique position to install and maintain all the infrastructure that did that. So essentially, we're providing the pipeline, and companies like Google or anybody else that wants to have a fast connection from one place to another can lease fiber from us. So we think it's a very good partnership. We do what we do best. We build and maintain infrastructure, and then Google gets to do what they do best, which is market and provide services to customers over that fiber optic line that they lease. So that's kind of where we are today. We have a much more robust system than we had 5 years ago. I believe that the construction of this system has prompted other construction in the area, both by other providers, and has made our area even more attractive to commerce. So I'll stop there and let you go to the next one.
Thank you. And so Huntsville has really been the largest city to pursue such a bold strategy of building a network and working with a partner in that way on a non-exclusive basis. And we can talk a little bit more perhaps about other benefits of the agreement that they have. But I want to move to Sean Strickler, who is the Vice President for Public Affairs at the Alabama Rural Electric Association of Cooperatives, the person with the most letters in his title on the panel. Welcome.
Thank you, Chris. And yes, I do have an expansive title that is just long for whatever my boss tells me to do. And Stacy, I'm really disappointed that I'm going behind you because you stole my line. Electric cooperatives are involved in high-speed internet, not because we want to be, but because we have to be. We're very good at providing electricity. There are 22 rural electric cooperatives throughout the state of Alabama that provide power to over 60% of the land mass and about 25% of the population in this state. And one thing that my cooperatives found is that they were in a digital desert, and no one was willing to come out and help them out. We looked for partnerships, and we've had a successful partnership or two. We've got a cooperative that is in with a local broadband company. Wiregrass is partnered with Troy Cable. But Chris, you had a list of about 3 of them up there, but actually our list is 7. We have 7 electric cooperatives that have gotten into this business in 8 that have gotten in some form or fashion. North Alabama Electric Cooperative, the very first one to get there in Jackson County, they've been in the business for 10 years. They got a grant, a federal grant, and now they serve everyone in their service territory. Tom Bigby Electric Cooperative, which has got Freedom Fiber, which is doing everything that they possibly can to get high-speed internet out to the people in their service territory and beyond. Central Alabama Electric Cooperative, Joe Wheeler Electric Cooperative, Coleman Electric Cooperative, Covington Electric Cooperative down in South Central Alabama, which has just announced in the last few weeks what with having an internet service provider over fiber, gigabit available. And lastly is Coosa Valley. And Coosa Valley has not yet announced when their internet service will be available, but they are in the very last portions of their board has approved for them to move forward if feasible. And they will move forward to their consumers very soon. I mentioned Wiregrass has got a partnership with Troy Cable. We're doing it because it's feasible in these cooperative areas. And Chris brought up some of the stumbles and the hurdles and everything. And one thing that all of our cooperatives have done is done a feasibility study. We are set up differently than our brethren out there that are for profit. They look at it to where they need a 3 to 5 year return on investment, a density of somewhere around 15 consumers per square mile. We don't look at it that way. We look at it in a much longer return on investment in a lower density because our co-ops, quite frankly, average 6 consumers per mile of line. Not a real good business model for anyone out there that's in the business of making money. And we understand that with the people that are in this to report to their shareholders and report to and to make a profit and to make a profit quickly. We just have a little bit different mindset on that. Stacy mentioned the immense need for data in the electric utility business now. Many of our cooperatives are looking at doing mainline fiber through hooking up their substations to make sure that data goes back and forth. And a lot of them are piggybacking with an internet service provider, which was made legal to do through House Bill 400 2 years ago. That was the Accessibility Act, where electric cooperatives and investor-owned utilities could enter into partnerships or create internet service providers so long as they weren't subsidized by the electric utility. A lot of things are going on. It's a very fluid discussion. It's very important that we go out and provide service, and we provide future-proof service. We don't need to rely on yesterday's technology. We need to look at the best available technologies if we're going to subsidize them, and we need to make sure that they have the ability to provide high-speed internet for everyone out there with very low latency. We're excited about what our legislature is doing right now, Chris. Senate Bill 215 was introduced. There are people on the pro and the con side of that, but it's something to look at private-public partnerships, as some of your previous panelists in the previous days have talked about. It's some way to formalize that like they kind of have with the state docs. We're excited about an actual plan and leadership and where our legislature and Senator Del Marsh is taking us. We're appreciative of where Senator Schofield took us with all the things that he's done in the leadership to try to get rural broadband. So we're excited to be a partner in this. I'm excited to be on this panel, and appreciate PARCA for doing this.
Excellent. I want to start in the Q&A discussion period, and this could get a little bit wild. I don't want this to be boring. I want to make sure people, if Stacy wants to jump in, I want you to jump in. So I'm going to start with a question of let's assume our prayers are answered, and in the summer, the virus is contained, and we more or less return to life as normal. I think some fear that we may see less urgency around this issue. And so, Macke, I'm curious, as someone, I had a colleague who went on to be the president of a bank in a rural part of Minnesota. I know that you think about all these issues. Paint us a picture of why this is urgent, even in that scenario.
Well, I think when we went into the pandemic, we really had 3 basic stunning issues that came up. One with the education was the student, the faculty, and the staff. Many of them didn't have adequate access to internet, broadband internet. And then as a banker, when we shut down or closed down and we sent about half our people home, a lot of them didn't have adequate broadband access to do their job. But I do believe in the new economy, the new economy, that broadband is going to be essential. And I do think lack of broadband is the silent killer to economic development, much like access to the interstate was, or 4-lane highway, or port, or an airport. If you don't have broadband access, a reliable, redundant broadband access, you're not getting the opportunity for economic development for your community. So I really important.
I apologize for speaking over you. And that's true to the home, right? We're not just talking about to a business park.
I agree, because home is where a lot of these people are. And there are people who are leaving the big cities and coming to communities like ours, and they need that access because they can work from home, they can work remotely. So you're looking at housing sales and retail sales and everything coming to your community. And until you have that reliable, affordable, easily accessible broadband, you're not going to be able to attract those people to your community.
Thank you. So I'm going to throw a question open. I think I'll start actually by directing it to Sean, but I want to have anyone answer it. Sean, you have your members are all over the place in terms of how they're dealing with this. What are the main problems they're trying to figure out right now? And then I'm going to ask a similar question to Stacy, and then a past tense question to Derek in terms of the big problems that you either are trying to resolve or have resolved.
Chris, are you looking at the main problems for getting it further out there, or the ones that they're having, the ones that started this, the problems that they're having?
Really, any of them. I mean, we have people at all stages of the process. Let's take it for you, like an electric co-op that was disappointed by the results of the recent auction from the Federal Communications Commission. They kind of get their teeth kicked in. They did a lot of work to get money from this auction, and the money did not go to them, which is a whole nother thing that we're not going to get too into. What are they thinking about now?
Well, the ones those are the ones that are in the business, and every single one of these cooperatives are not relying upon grants to make a worthwhile project. What they've done is they've done a feasibility study. They've looked at about a 30 to 35% take rate to be able to do this in phases. And the unfortunate thing is we left so much money with the way that FCC Rural Digital Opportunity Fund reverse auction went. So much money was taken away from the state of Alabama and the way it was bid down that some of these folks didn't get, that it just slowed everything down. And the biggest problem that we have with any cooperative that gets into this business to provide high-speed internet, and we're talking about internet speeds, minimum internet speeds of 50/50, at $49, sign me up, please. It's tempering the expectations of their members. The person that's in the B section of phase 4, who thinks that, like you said, we're going to get it in 6 months. No, I'm sorry, but phase 4 is actually 3.5 years down the road. Whereas because they're in the most rural of areas, we've got it, you can't just snap your fingers, wave a magic wand, and all of a sudden you have fiber in front of your house to be able to connect. There's a process to hang or bury that fiber to get it there. In the most rural areas, unfortunately, are going to be the last places where that fiber winds its way to, because if we put it there first, it's got to connect to something. You don't want to put it to where it's not connected to anything. So tempering the expectations to be able to get to those folks, because they think, man, this plan's out there, we're going to get it yesterday, and not getting that grant money. Because when you get the grant money, that means that you can go guns blazing. You can get it out there to the most rural of areas even quicker. And unfortunately, we won't. It's going to be down the road.
And as I go to Stacy, I'll note one of the things we see, the federal government is putting money into this, but there's going to be a strong role for the state of Alabama to set policy as well. Stacy, what kind of problems are you dealing with right now, or have you overcome that you think are relevant for the audience?
Well, our recent big expansion really caused problems in that now everybody's coming to us wanting to be connected. And there's more build we can do. And we're getting hit with questions that we never anticipated, or requests that we never anticipated. So it's figuring out how to manage those and to best leverage the network that we've built to do what we really need for it to do, and help it to serve those other customers. And I want to back up for a minute to a question that you asked, Macke, and talk about the need for high-speed internet and life after COVID, which we know is never going to be quite the same. I think certainly virtual meetings like this will continue because they're convenient and they make meetings accessible to people that couldn't otherwise attend conferences and things like this. So I think this is here to stay to some degree. But even before COVID, I used to like to use the example to go look at Google Maps. and look at a residential area, and you see all these little icons pop up in their businesses, and people are operating their businesses out of their homes. And just think about everything that you do now, from making reservations to ordering food online to looking for a vacation spot. It's all done over the internet. And if somebody doesn't have a good website, they're probably not getting my business. If their website's not responsive, they're not getting my business. So we're relying on this for everyday things that we just take for granted and don't even think about. So I did want to throw that out there. And Huntsville itself, although people that have been here may think that Huntsville is urban, and we are fairly urban. We're fastest growing city in Alabama. But we still have rural areas in our service area. In fact, there's someone in my department who lives pretty far out on the edge, has not been able to work from home because he does not have internet. I had a call, this is probably a couple years back, from one of our electric customers that they were just outside the area where we had built fiber and where Google was providing service. And they were wanting to get Google Fiber because they wanted to participate in, someone in the home had a medical condition. They wanted to participate in a home monitoring program that they just could not do with their current provider. It just wasn't fast enough. And this is the way we're going. It's amazing that we can provide that kind of medical service and possibly life-saving services. And then you think, well, I live in Huntsville, Alabama, or just outside Huntsville, Alabama. Why don't I have access to this?
Those are very salient points, especially as telehealth is about to change dramatically as a result of lessons being learned right now. Derek, would you share with us a story that you think is relevant regarding challenges that you overcame along the way?
Well, I guess the biggest challenge that we overcame on the way is finding a way to do it to begin with. There was a lot of challenges there. We actually had and I can't think of the terminology, but we basically sued ourselves. Cities sued themselves to get a judge to rule on basically on how our financing was going to work, so we were allowed to do it. We had to work around a lot of the state laws that were very prohibitive for a municipal trying to get into the business. To be honest with you, we really never wanted to be in the business. As I mentioned in my introduction, Mayor Full, we tried to get other utilities. I sat in meetings with the mayor. He started before I was ever a part of OPS with other people trying to get them. And I sat in some after I joined OPS, trying to get other people to create competition. And was speaking with him earlier, we do not believe that we would have what we have today. It's improved our competition. Their speed offerings are greater today because we're here. We built the fiber network. So you have more people with more access. So, and I think Stacy mentioned it, as more people have come and invested in the community since they've offered this fiber and Google's coming in. So competition in the cooperative world in rural areas, you may not get competition as much, but who's to say it won't once you build something out there? So, and I think everybody wins when you create competition. And that's what we were able to successfully do here. We got more investments in Opelika. We may still be sitting way behind if we had not taken those steps back in 2010 to build our own network.
One of my favorite memories of Mayor Fuller bragging about the network was that if you pick up the phone to call someone there, they speak Alabaman. And from a place called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, I deeply appreciated that.
That was true.
Mac, let me ask you, there's a question coming out of the chat about who would be key partners in the Black Belt. So if you're speaking to a bank president in the Black Belt and they're trying to get, from where they are to the commanding heights of where you are, what would you recommend them?
Well, we'd be glad to talk to anybody about it. You're gonna have to work with your elected officials and your county officials and your utility providers, because as Stacy said, they own the pole, and you need the pole and access to do that. So it's got to be a public-private partnership, and then leverage any type of government funding and grant that you can possibly get. I view this, we're the genesis of the Tennessee Valley Authority here in the Shoals area. And I see this process of electrifying the valley that TVA had, or electrifying rural communities. The internet broadband is the same thing, much like the Eisenhower interstate system was. It's all very important, and we're just in the early stages of that. And fortunately, we have Opelika and Huntsville that have done it and are doing it well as an example for us.
Thank you. I want to see, Sean, if you have any ideas about that as well.
What I do, but the first thing I've got to correct Macke on is we hear that the internet's just like electricity, but I need to remind everyone, the internet doesn't work without electricity. So it's never going to be quite as important. And I must say that that's what I've got to say, since I do work for the rural electric cooperatives, the electricity is always more important. Now, broadband is very close behind, but
Sean, just a quick note. When the wildfires in the West took out large swaths of Chelan County, a provider that does electricity and internet access went to its customers and assured them it would be a few weeks, but they were going to get the electricity back as soon as possible. And these people said, yeah, but when's the internet coming back? In part because the distributed energy is working against you a little bit. But I very much appreciate your point. Electricity is the foundation of just about everything that we rely on today.
Yeah, and when people just take electricity for granted, I mean, it's there. And that is one of the problems. Everyone wants to know, if we got electricity out there, why can't we do this? And unfortunately, the genie's out of the bottle. It's different than when we set up our territories and when we figured out how to do electricity as a utility. We've got a responsibility to serve as an electric utility, which means we got to come up with a way to run those lines there, whether we like it or not. Whereas in telecommunications and with broadband, you have a choice. You make a financial business decision as to whether or not it makes sense to go into the Black Belt. And those are the feasibility studies that all of our cooperatives have done and gone out and looked at to try to figure out if there is a way. In the Black Belt, grants for infrastructure are extremely important, but Chris, in your opening monologue, you talked about the ABC for students and on the affordability side. Affordability is just as important, and to figure out ways to where we can continue things like ABC for students so that those people can afford to subscribe. Because if you go into a historically economic depressed area, you can run fiber for days, but it doesn't matter if people can't afford to connect. And if people can't afford to pay for the service, that feasibility study is never going to work. So it's going to take a combination of exactly what Macke said. Everyone's going to have to come together, and we're going to have to figure out where we need to do the programs that make the most sense. We've got to have affordability programs as well as infrastructure programs in places like the Black Belt so that we can finally solve the chicken and egg debate as to which comes first. I honestly think without high-speed broadband, we're going to be talking about problems in the Black Belt forever.
So, Brian, do we have a chance for quick closing comments? I see that you've come back to prompt me.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say this is a very robust conversation today. And Sean, I think you wrapped it up very well, that it's got to be a combination of policy and investment. And in order for all of our communities to thrive and be resilient, we've got to have the infrastructure in place, but we also have to have the policy to get folks to the infrastructure. So significant comments, and let me just thank all of you all for your expertise and your commitment to the state. Chris, Stacy, Derek, Macke, Sean, just wonderful conversation this morning. I've got one little thing that I need to do before we go. I want to talk just a little bit about what's going on tomorrow. We're excited about the conversation. We'll be joined by Allison Brandt from AARP in Washington, Monica Baskin from UAB, Vic Wilson from CLASS, and they'll be sharing their visions of what full broadband access and the adoption would mean for Alabama. And frankly, how do we get there? So most importantly, though, for all of you participants, this will be a collaborative conversation. So we want you to share your ideas, priorities, and goals and dream as well. So we're looking forward to having an interactive conversation tomorrow, not only with the panelists, but also the participants. And I must remind you, you do not have to be camera ready for the discussion tomorrow. If you would raise your hand, we will be able to facilitate that conversation on audio as well. But from all of us here at PARCA, we appreciate you all spending this time with us, and we look forward to the next conversation.